Welcome back to Q&A. The Chief Coroner thinks we need to do more to protect our young people. Judge Neil MacLean wants the government to act on and parents to know more about the dangers of things like cyberbullying. On Friday, Justice Minister Judith Collins told the Law Commission to make finishing its work on cyberbullying its top priority. But there have been other recommendations ignored over the years on alcohol and huffing, for example. Judge MacLean says it's time to make the changes. Judge MacLean is live with Shane Todima.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Judge MacLean, for joining us this morning. We have the second highest overall death rate of young people in the developed world. As Chief Coroner, tell us what you're seeing and why so many of our young people are dying.
If I knew the answer to that question, I think I'd get the Nobel Prize. We call it as we see it. The coroners who work with me, we speak out when we see what's happening, when we think that something needs to be done, or there are lessons to be learned. And cyberbullying and youth suicide and drug abuse are areas where we're seeing a constant theme.
How much of this is down to the risks that our young kids are taking these days? We think about 50 years ago when a risk was teasing a mate in the schoolyard or sneaking a puff of a cigarette. These days, a risk is sniffing something out of a container, which can result in death.
Yes, I think life's more dangerous now. There's more opportunities to harm yourself permanently than perhaps there were 50 years ago.
And that's what you're seeing?
Yes.
Last weekend, a 12-year-old Christchurch boy, he died after huffing or inhaling butane from a canister. How serious is the abuse of butane these days?
Quite serious. There's been a period in which there hasn't been too much of a problem. I mean, we saw it in the past, and it's often a variation. Currently, it's the butane canisters that are seem to be the preferred method. But it's very worrying because these kids, I don't think, realise the permanent damage they're doing to themselves. Even if they don't kill themselves, basically, they're not really going to succeed in life if they're getting this sort of stuff into their system.
We're told that 28 kids have died over the past 3 to 4 years.
Yes.
Serious.
It is. 28 too many.
Coroners have made many recommendations about this, but nothing seems to have happened. Are you disappointed with that?
It's probably not fair to say nothing's happened. We do get responses to recommendations, but in a number of areas, I think coroners are feeling a sense of frustration that what they're saying seems not to be making any difference.
One of your own coroners this morning, Dr. Bain in Rotorua, has vented his frustration as well, saying that recommendations are being ignored. He says that if his recommendations in a particular case, I think it was the jet ski case, had have been followed, it would have saved someone's life.
Yes, I think most coroners with any year's experience have had that, have seen that happening, and it is frustrating.
So do you believe that lives are being lost because recommendations are being ignored?
Yes.
And what can be done?
Well, at the end of the day, coroners are a bit like the canary in the mine. We call out when we see a problem. We don't have, and probably never should have, any kind of enforcement power. What we do is we say, look, this is what's happening. This is based on the evidence we've seen. Here are some recommendations. But it's actually over to the community, to the government, to the leaders to actually implement it.
So how do you get the government's attention?
By just plugging away, I guess, by making sure that our recommendations are sound, that they're evidence-based, that they're targeted at the right people, that they're not just pious platitudes, but that we actually do what we can to say, look, we've got some suggestions here. This is not our own personal ideas. This is what we've seen coming through in the particular case or cases in front of me.
Can we take a look at a recommendation made recently by Coroner Gary Evans in March? He recommended to the CEO of Youth Affairs, which stated that government take a fresh look at supply reduction strategies, we're talking about huffing here, and the policing of volatile substance abuse in the light of the evidence contained in these findings. Now, we rang Youth Affairs. They said it wasn't really their thing, and they referred us on to the Ministry of Health. They were surprised that Youth Affairs had referred us to the Ministry of Health. They dug a bit deeper, and then they found that it had been sent to the Child Youth Mortality Review Committee, and they weren't sure why it had been passed to them. Are you happy with that?
Well, you could say it's a form of buck passing, couldn't you? Part of the trick of making the system work is to make sure that you target your recommendations at the right people. But sometimes it's very difficult to know who is the right person. Now, I've seen the response that came from the ministry on that. To be fair, they have referred the matter to the Child Youth Mortality Review Committee, and I am aware that that committee, a national committee under Dr. Nick Baker, is proposing to do some work. Now that's good because it means that some people with expertise and training can start to have a look at this problem, shake it out a bit, not just on the basis of one case, but looking at the bigger picture. And hopefully they may come up with some suggestions.
But you want more from the government?
It's not just the government, it's all the various agencies, because often recommendations aren't just pitched at government or even quasi-government. They're at, DHBs or particular organisations or, people in the farming community, that sort of thing. Yeah, sure, from a job satisfaction point of view and for the benefit of the community, we'd like to see more happen.
When we talk about huffing, we talk about alcohol, we talk about cyberbullying. In your experience, what you're seeing now, what's proving to be the most harmful for our young people?
Well, I think that it's the drugs, the solvents, the alcohol. Young people are particularly vulnerable. As Sir Peter Gluckman points out, probably young people's brains that don't mature until they're into their 20s. They are very vulnerable to all this risky stuff that's out there. They don't have the skills, the training, the support to be able to handle all the stuff that life flings at you.
Can we talk more about alcohol? Because the drinking age of 18 has been blamed in part in a recent report for our high youth death rate. Should it be raised to 20, sorry?
I think I'd duck that one. I don't have a particular view, and I don't think a chief coroner or coroners should allow themselves to advance hobby horses. But certainly abuse of alcohol is a problem in society, but it particularly impacts on young people simply because they don't know how to handle it and they aren't aware of the risks.
So if they don't know how to handle it, where does parental responsibility come into this?
Right.
Because when we're told up to 70% of our young kids get their alcohol from their parents, it's the hard truth that parents actually have to take more responsibility.
It's easy to bash parents and to bash the schools. The reality is many of our young people who get into problems, not all, you look at their family support, their family networks, and you think they never had a chance. The support wasn't there. The family is often dysfunctional and they rely very much on their peers who may well not be the best influence on them.
Parents obviously would have the best influence on kids, wouldn't they?
Yes, if they know what's going on. It's tough being a parent, I know that. It's just hard to be able to keep tabs on what your children are doing, and particularly the insidious influence now of the late night texting, access to the internet, all that social network stuff. Parents have a hope of knowing what's going on.
Do parents these days have the expertise? Do they have the support to be able to manage these issues, especially when we're talking about these different risks and the greater risks that our young kids are taking these days?
I don't think they do, and it's a generation thing. Even the 30-year, 25-year gap, what the world the parents grew up is so different from what our young people are growing up. I don't think we do understand. Most people, adults, probably don't know about the dangers of butane, wouldn't even dream of sniffing petrol and that sort of thing. And they don't know and understand what's going on in cyberspace.
So what do we do about it?
I guess learn more, talk about it, get it out in the open, and that's where the coroner role, and I think my role, comes in, because I have a statutory responsibility to, quote, educate the public, unquote. unusual thing for a judge to have to do. But that's what all we can do. Just keep talking about it, be it suicide, be it solvent abuse, be it cyberbullying, whatever.
So more dialogue?
More dialogue, yeah, more opening it up. You know, getting rid of the concept that there's some taboo topics that it's wise not to talk about because it might encourage people to do things. Let's face up to it. People need to know what's really going on in our society.
We can also change the laws though, can't we? We can make it tougher. We
can do, but law is a very blunt instrument to change, particularly young people's behaviour. And some of the young people we're having problems with, they're not even of the age where the law is going to apply to them anyway.
Because I look at, for example, the price of tobacco. The government's trying to put that up.
Yes.
There's a whole big debate around alcohol at the moment. Do you think that having a minimum price around alcohol could deter young ones, or are we beating up the wrong track here?
Tricky territory, because the more expensive you make it, the harder you make it to get to. Kids will find another way of getting that high, of getting that buzz, on with much more dangerous material.
Like what we're seeing with Huffing.
Huffing, yeah.
Cyberbullying. The government has come out saying that they want to fast-track it.
Yes.
And it's being made as a priority. They've got a few law changes proposed. Do they go far enough, in your opinion?
I think it's a very good step forward. I'm very pleased to see that they've picked it up. The credit for it, of course, should be given to the Law Commission, who identified the changes needed. And I imagine they'll be pleased to see that their recommendations are now being looked at seriously by the government.
Again, if I could make the point to you, several coroners have linked cyberbullying to our high youth suicide rate.
Yes.
Over many years. Are you disappointed that it's taken so long for recommendations, for something to happen?
Yes. You know, in a perfect world, we'd like to think that we make a serious recommendation, something gets done about it. But we've got to live in the real world. There's so many demands on government and people and society to try and rectify lots of wrongs.
Does government need to be more accountable? Do we need a new system? Do we need to be looking at how we deal with recommendations and to ensure that they are followed up?
Well, one step that I have cautiously pushed is to follow what the Brits do, what some of the Australian jurisdictions now do, and actually make it mandatory, compulsory, to respond to a coroner's recommendation. And the Brits have 56 days. I think Victoria has much the same thing. And then have to have a system of monitoring it. Because at the moment, our recommendations sort of can easily, so to speak, die in the ditch because they go out there, they sit there, they're never actioned. We're taking some steps to put them on an internet site, summary of recommendations. We also now summarise the responses. So there's a body of work building up there which will be useful to researchers, to everybody, to see what have we been saying, what has been the response. I think we may be ready to move on to having a look at making it mandatory to respond, and if you don't, have as it were, a sort of a name and shaming, as the Brits do. These are the organisations which have not responded. Sometimes an organisation will respond and say, you're completely misconceived. If you'd asked us this, you wouldn't have recommended that. Okay, we'll post it.
Judge MacLean, we have to leave it there, but thank you very much for coming in. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure.